From the KDLM studios, it's time for Hodge Podge, presented by Partnership for Health and airing on Lakes TV3.
Welcome into Hodge Podge. It is a Tuesday, this first day of December. I'm Joel Ketke. Thanks for dropping by Hodge Podge here today on this sunny Tuesday. We are joined via our Zoom studios. Kelly Blackledge, a monthly guest with us here on Hodge Podge from the Tamarack National Wildlife Refuge. Kelly, good morning. Thanks for being with us today on Hodge Podge.
Yes, good morning. And it is sunny. Isn't that great?
We'll take that sunshine any day of the week. I love that. Folks listening obviously can't see the backdrop there, but you've got a real outdoorsy backdrop on the Zoom call this morning.
Yeah, that backdrop is about to turn to a snowy one, though.
Last time you were with us, Kelly, we were talking about bird watching, but now we're going to talk about something I think we can all relate to, and I mean this tongue in cheek. We're going to talk a little about getting fat today, correct?
Yeah. And you know, whether it's an FAT fat or PHAT fat, good, right?
So who's getting fat out at the refuge?
On it. Yes. Over the holidays, it's fun to work on getting a little fat.
And we all had a lot of training with Thanksgiving this past week. So who's getting fat over at the refuge?
Right. So that's what's kind of fun. Right now we have lots of wildlife that are preparing for a long winter and need to add a little bit of extra protection, or really it's energy to be able to survive the winter, whether they're still awake through the winter or hibernating. Obviously, some of the animals that have started hibernating already gone through that phase, like our bears and 13-line ground squirrels, chipmunks, you know, things like that that are either caching food or building up some fat content. Even beavers, you know, they're awake during the winter, but certainly cache food, as well as adding some nice fatty layers to their body to be able to survive that cold water. And yeah, because they're out and about, right? So we're good at that. They're good at that.
I think we're all good at that.
But it happens. So, but it's such an important factor for wildlife to build up those fat content. And one of the things that helps provide that is acorns. And we did have a fairly good acorn production year. Those years that we don't makes it pretty difficult for animals to find really high calorie foods. You know, speaking of foods, you mentioned cheesecake earlier. So there's 400 calories in a piece of cheesecake. And if you were a bear and you were preparing for winter, how many pieces of cheesecake would you have to eat?
Boy, just guessed on my, I'm 6 feet, I go about 240. I'm guessing I need like 300 maybe.
It's close. So you'd kind of have to go with about 50 pieces of cheesecake a day.
A day?
A day. So your calorie intake is so high that you're really building some good fat content. And they can, you know, September when you do have the acorns out and about, and lots of other hazelnuts and things like that, a lot of vegetation they can take in, they can gain a lot of weight that way. Once you get, you know, closer to November, then those things are harder to find. There isn't as many left. And if there's snow on the ground and, you know, so they really have to prepare before that. So, but that's about 20,000 calories a day that they're, you know, intaking, as well as other animals. So whether even beavers, you know, or you see a lot of activity in the fall to gather a lot of energy to keep going. And they're so good at processing those fats. It's just amazing how they can process it. It's not like our body, you know, we're not as good with having that. And not all animals really need to be fat. Your fox and, you know, bobcats and things like that, not good to be fat. But the raccoon, the skunk, the Those things look good fat. Porcupines, they're good to be fat. You don't want to see a skinny one of those. So some animals are really good at being fat and some not, aren't supposed to be, I guess.
So I've got a unique question for you. How versed are you on the patterns of frogs?
Frogs. So there are animals that are can freeze, are freeze avoidance or freeze tolerance animals, and true hibernators like frogs. Wood frogs, for example, as they freeze solid, right? There are some that go under. For example, leopard frogs will be in the marsh or river, in the softer muds, hibernating. But our gray tree frogs, our wood frogs, and I think spring peepers are hibernating in the leaf litter and in that frozen layer. So they're freezing solid. I take it you've seen a frozen frog.
Well, so here's the question I have for you. So a buddy of mine belonged to a lot of fishing pages on social media, and a friend of mine from Minnesota posted a picture of a walleye that he had caught recently. And he had filleted the walleye out, and inside of the walleye's stomach was two leopard frogs. And a lot of questions are like, well, where did you find frogs this time of year? How are you using frogs to walleye fish? And I mean, as a lifelong walleye angler, honestly, I didn't realize this. But apparently this time of year, those frogs dig down into the mud to hibernate. The walleyes will actually go down into the mud and pluck them out. And I did not know that. So I thought I'd bring this up to you here just to ask you some questions. So these leopard frogs, they kind of get down in the mud for their winter hibernation?
Yeah, leopard frogs and also green frogs and a few other species that are more, that are like true frogs compared to a tree frog, which is a little different species. So yeah, I've taken pictures of otters eating frogs in the middle of January because they're in the water. They can find them. And unfortunately, they don't have very much defense during this time of year when they really slow down and are supposed to be hibernating. So they're not awake enough to defend themselves. Not that they would be able to do that with a walleye after them or an otter for that matter. But there's a whole chemistry of amphibians. Oh, don't get me started on frogs, but a whole chemistry of that happens in amphibians to survive the winter in terms of the biochemistry and the buildup of sugars so that they can survive the crystallization that would totally damage our tissues. They can survive because they have this going on in their body where they develop proteins that will allow their cells to stay intact. And then this glycerol, kind of an antifreeze that happens in their body. In fact, some will even do an ethylene glycol, which is almost like the fuel that you put in your car, right? So a really good antifreeze to be able to survive freezing solid without having your tissues deteriorate, so they can wake up in the spring and hop right along.
I've seen walleyes caught on a lot of different things, but never this late in the year have I seen one with frogs actually in their stomach. So, because there was a lot of posts saying, well, what bait shop is selling frogs this time of year?
Right.
And everybody's like, no. And then somebody piped in and said, hey, if you didn't know this, that those walleyes will actually root.
Yeah, and you would think that they would have to be moving for that walleye to be interested in it.
I would think, yeah. So I just thought,
yeah.
I'm glad that we've got the frog expert with us this morning. That
is a bit of a mystery, though. Why would a walleye pick up a frog that's not moving? Anyway. And then, of course, insects, too, Yes. So there are insects in the water that the fish are eating right now. They are moving about in the warm, on the bottom of the lakes. So there's definitely those kind of food options for them. The insects don't hibernate in the mud under there. And then some that are above ground go into a process called diapause. That's their hibernation. It's a little, again, back to biochemistry, this whole cool chemistry thing happens with insects. And you've probably seen goldenrods with the goldenrod gulls.
Yes.
Rod plants. develop those galls, and inside there is a moth larvae that spends the winter in there. And some folks know that because they like to open those up and use those for bait for ice fishing.
I'm just going to say yet another way to catch a walleye.
Yeah. I don't know how we got on fish, but yeah, that's true. So yeah, so insects are surviving or going into hibernation. Some will, of course, die off for the winter. Adults, and then the young survive or come up. Mammals, not all mammals. In fact, very few mammals hibernate. And some will argue that even a bear doesn't really hibernate because their temperature doesn't drop enough, that they're still easily awakened. Females are giving birth and there's a lot of activity going there. But they generally don't come out of their den. They don't eat or poop or, any of that for 7 months, up to 7 months sometimes that they're in the den. But some animals like skunks, raccoons, squirrels, they go into a state that's called torpor. So it's kind of a half hibernation, like a long sleep, but not a full 7-month sleep. So
kind of like all of us after a good Thanksgiving meal.
Yeah. We go into torpor. After that always feels good. So there's a lot of activity happening in terms of preparing for winter. And of course, now that a lot of our waters are frozen over, in fact, there is, speaking of walleye, ice fishing happening right now too. So hopefully all of these animals have already prepared and have a good cache built up. Even so, little animals like our small mammals are not, usually they go into torpor as well. They're not generally full hibernators because their body surface to energy take up, they have to be able to eat all the time because they're tiny. So they've cached a lot of food. And of course, you've probably seen runways of rodents in the snow because they're out, trying to collect more seeds. And obviously then they're also food for other animals too, like our fox and owls and things like that. So caching food is certainly a really important thing. I wonder do you cache food? I don't know. I don't think I cache.
Oh, sure I do. Every time I go to the store, I buy stuff and I put it away off to the side and don't let the kids find it because that way it's still available. So yeah, I squirrel away stuff just like a squirrel.
I feel like Halloween triggers that, you store away the candy so nobody can find it. And that's true. Actually a lot of canning and stuff happens in the fall. So we do cache food, I guess, too. Yes.
We are going to take a break here on Hodge Podge. We opened the show talking about getting fat. We're going to come back and talk about how not to get fat. We'll also find out what's going on with the Friends of Tamarack. Back with more on Hodge Podge segment 2 right after these.